go with this first image here. It's just a title screen, Signposts of the End Times. Okay. And before we get too deep, let's just go over an analogy, okay? Why signposts? Well, signposts tell you a lot of things. If you're going to the beach and you see Myrtle Beach 50 miles, does that mean you're in Myrtle Beach? No, it doesn't mean you're in Myrtle Beach. It means you are getting closer to Myrtle Beach, 50 miles, right? Now, eventually, when you get there, you're going to see a sign that says, Welcome to Myrtle Beach, and then you know you've arrived. But these signposts kind of tell you what's coming. And so we're talking about the end times here, of which you are a part, believe it or not. If you want to look at these events in order, I always find it very helpful to be uh, locked in time and space. I need to know what's happening, what's going to happen, what has happened, past, present, future. So if you go with the present, we're in the church age. We're at the tail end of the church age. The church age is ended by the rapture. The rapture is when the believers are taken to heaven, given their new glorified bodies. And then that begins on earth the time of the Great Tribulation, which is 7 years. And then at the end of the 7-year period, that is when you have the second coming of Jesus Christ. So there is our order of events. So if we go to the next slide here, we got a verse from Matthew 23. Words of Jesus here. And it goes like this: O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. All right. That's right before the famous Matthew 24 chapter, Matthew 24. All right, house, desolate, speaks of that. What house are they talking about? The house of Israel. Okay. He's speaking of the temple. He's speaking of Jerusalem itself. In the next set of verses, we're going to see the disciples' reaction to this. They can't fathom what the future can hold, but that's how prophecy works. You're given future events ahead of time. Okay. Next slide, we have Matthew 24, the very beginning. Verse 1, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be one left here, one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. All right, so Jesus burst their bubble there a little bit. And the disciples were not wanting to be, disagreeable with Jesus. But they pointed out something to him in passing that they thought he would like. But they essentially said, see these grand buildings, does this look desolate to you? Because you got to remember that we just came from chapter 23. So now we're moving into chapter 24. So the disciples are saying, look, I know you just said our house will be left desolate, but look what we've got here. And Jesus is speaking prophetically here because the Romans did destroy the temple in 70 AD and the rest of the city. This was about 4 decades after these verses here. Let's go to the next slide. Continuing on in Matthew 24, verse 3 through 5. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, which is right next to the temple, the disciples came to him privately saying, Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? In the King James, it says the end of the world. It's a little misleading. Kind of sounds like the planet's going to blow up. But the actual translation is the end of the age. And Jesus answered them, See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ. And they will lead many astray. All right. So the disciples are still perplexed here. So they push the issue. They want to know, okay, tell us then, Jesus, what are the signs going to be? How do we know that you're coming back? And they were hoping for an answer, and they got one. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, and I call this one Signpost 1 that Jesus mentions. Many will come in his name. Many will come in his name. So the next slide we're going to look at will give us some modern examples of American examples, if you will, of this kind of behavior. Okay, it helps to look at stuff that we can understand, makes it more real to us. So let's go to that next slide. All right, a few people who have claimed to be Jesus. You got Jim Jones. Okay, he was the one that took all his people down to South America and they committed ritual suicide, drank the poison Kool-Aid, remember? Charles Manson, he led a cult that eventually led a lot of people to go murder other people. He wanted to start a race war. Real bad dude, very crazy. I would say probably less crazy and more possessed, but that's my opinion. All right, you got like a Marshall Applewhite. I don't know if anybody remembers that name. That was the Heaven's Gate cult. I watched a good documentary on them. They were out there. They had some out there beliefs, but they thought a spaceship was going to come get them and take them to heaven, essentially. But you had to be enlightened and all that, and that's the mark of most cults. We know this information that you don't know, and you need us to tell you about it so that you can become enlightened. Another one was David Koresh. All right, that's the Branch Davidian cult. That was Waco, Texas. That was a big disaster there with the compound burning down and all those people dying. That aside, he was a crazy dude. Thought he was Jesus. Said he was Jesus. Another example of a famous cult from our time. So that phrase that many will come in my name, it happens. Okay, it's happened in our time. All right, let's go to the next slide here. We got Matthew 24, 6 through 8. So we're just continuing on in Matthew 24 if you haven't seen the pattern yet. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. There's that signpost. Not yet. You're getting close. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Birth pains. It's a lot packed in there. Let's see. Let's break this verse down a little bit. Okay. The labor pains. That's important because you have to understand how labor pains work. All the women watching this know exactly what I'm talking about. But for the men, we don't know nothing. It has to be explained to us. So the way it was explained to me is this way. That you start to have short pains that are manageable, but you feel them getting longer in duration and stronger in intensity, and that's how you know that you're not just having false labor pains. That's how you know that you are maybe moving into the territory where you need to go to the hospital. That's what Jesus is talking about with this. All these examples that he's giving: wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, many coming in his name. All these things are like birth pains. So the earth is having birth pains. The creation, the system down here, the age that they spoke of earlier on this world is having birth pains. All right, let's go to the next slide here. And this is signpost 2. This is wars and rumors of wars. Okay. Going to the next slide here. We have worldwide fatalities from war since 1400 AD. 1400 AD. Let's see. Now, why did I pick that? Okay. There's a guy named Dr. Brooke Brucke at Georgia Tech. He made up an Excel database. It was called the Conflict Catalog. You can download it off the internet. This is where I got it. Um, it starts at 1400 AD and goes to the year 2000. Okay, so this slide we're looking at here starts in the 1400s. As you can see, these numbers, with the exception of a little dip there in the 1700s, has steadily increased, and these are fatalities from war, and they're in 100-year blocks there. The last one was the 1900s, which we just, well, relatively just passed. That would include World War I and World War II. Um, it skyrocketed in the 1900s. A lot of reasons, warfare became more deadly, weapons became more deadly, atomic weapons were developed. But if you break it down to just reasons like that, it takes away the prophetic implications. Jesus said there will be wars and rumors of wars that are going to be like birth pains. So you can see how it's increased over the centuries there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And we call this signpost 3. This is famines. Jesus spoke about this earlier in that same verse from Matthew 24. Okay, I need to explain the difference between war and famine. I'm sorry, not the difference, the relationship between war and famine. Just like in Revelation, where it shows the red horse of war followed by the black horse of famine, is because famine always follows war. When you have a war, it disrupts everything in the area, all your commerce, all your normal systems that operate to feed the people. Water and food are your two biggest concerns, and shelter. And a lot of that stuff's gone after a war. Okay. Um, Add to that the fact that we waste a lot of food when we have everything set up properly. Uh, we waste so much food in the United States, and they hang on to every bit of it in other parts of the world because they need it so badly. And then there's problems with the distribution, right? Distribution of food, corruption. We saw this just recently in the Gaza Strip, where they were pouring humanitarian aid into Gaza, and Hamas got a hold of it, and they were selling it and making money off of it. So it was not distributed equally. And maybe humans can't ever equally distribute food in the proper manner, but that's where you get this problem of famines. Okay. So let's look at the next slide here about famines. And it's a chart, our world in data. Okay, it's got a hyperlink down there in case you think I made this up. I can't make up charts that look this good. Famine victims worldwide since the 1860s. So we're moving a little bit closer to our era here since the 1860s. And if you look at that, the chart, the numbers on the left are in the millions. Starts down at 2 million, 4 million, 6 million. That would be people. And then across the bottom there, it starts in the 1860s and works its way over to the 2010 to 2016 range. You've got all these named famines here and millions and millions and millions of people dying, which in the United States is hard for us to fathom, extremely hard for us to fathom because we have so much here. Just one example, looking at this chart here, it's not even the largest number. In the 1960s, okay, the Great Leap Forward famine, okay, 1958 to 1962 in China under Mao Zedong, is the largest known famine. And in that decade, there's over 16.5 million people die of starvation. That's what a famine death looks like. It's starvation. And that takes a while. If you can get some food, if you can get some sustenance, you're not going to die. But these 16 plus million people didn't make it to that point. They died of starvation. Okay. Also, you got to think about this. Let me see what slide I'm on here. Okay, back on track. there were over 89 million famine deaths versus 106 million war deaths. Okay, so if you compare both time frames, that shows that famines can be linked to specific historic events. Okay, there was a big spike in the 1910s to the 1920s. That would be World War One. That caused those famines that followed in the 1920s. Okay, and it's an average of about 9 million people die each year of hunger. Now we see those commercials on TV, feed a starving child. It doesn't register with us because we have so much food. I have a house full of food because I'm a bit of a prepper. I mean, I could live off the food in this house for years before I ever thought about farming. Years, unless somebody came and took it all. But I'm just blown away that 9 million people on average every year die of starvation. It's just crazy. Let's go to the next slide. That's signpost 4. We're talking about earthquakes in various places. Okay. Earthquakes in various places. I don't know how many of you have experienced an earthquake. Okay. If you come from California, you probably experienced a lot of earthquakes. If you're near or on a fault line, essentially. Sorry, thirsty. I'll tell you a little story about when I was in high school. I went to high school in Hanahan, South Carolina. Y'all probably don't know where it's at. You can Google it. It'll show you it's near Charleston. And this is how God showed me that when I was researching this lesson, I was on the right track. Because when I started reading about these earthquakes in diverse places, various places, I thought, man, I remember an earthquake when I was in high school. And what it was I was in sociology and psychology, same class. It was split up between two different semesters. And we were just sitting there supposedly studying, but basically we were just sitting there quiet. Half the class was probably asleep. And I remember the room just shaking very lightly for about 3 to 5 seconds. And then it stopped. And everybody just kind of looked up, started looking at each other like, is that real? And we didn't have, smartphones where we could just see that, oh, look, we just had an earthquake. It took me a long time, in fact, when I was researching this lesson, to figure out that what I experienced was actually real. And I'll tell you how I did it. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, and that'll kind of tie into this. All right, here's a screenshot from the USGS website where you can search by area and time frame for earthquakes that registered on their equipment. And as you can see from this screenshot, if you look there, that's Charleston Harbor. And then there's the ocean out there, of course, the Atlantic Ocean. That little blue dot represents the epicenter. It was near Centerville, South Carolina. And that was August 21st, 1992. I was a sophomore in high school. I checked this against my high school transcript to make sure that this was the right time frame, and it was. And I was blown away, not only by the Lord kind of giving me this as something I can research and study and bring to y'all, but because it was showing me the accuracy of these earthquake measuring devices that they've installed all around the world. And so that's a little bit of a mini testimony there. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. Okay, this is from just today. Like, I recorded this and I went and I just Googled earthquakes, South Carolina news. Okay, earthquakes, South Carolina news. And this is what I got. Another South Carolina earthquake rocked the Midlands early Saturday. Here's why. And it's because they had multiple earthquakes there. It's right outside Columbia. Now, this isn't exactly right in my backyard. It's a couple hours away. But there was a 2.57 magnitude earthquake hit near Elgin, 6:30 a.m. according to USGS. Happened about 1.5 miles below ground, it says. And so what the article is going on to say is that we had so many earthquakes last year, so many the year before, and they're on the uptick. Now we're only 4 months into this year, 2025, and I think they were a little behind schedule, but a lot can happen in 8 months. And South Carolina is not known for their earthquakes. We have some fault lines, but they're not as active as like a California would be. So that is just an example of a recent earthquake and how much of these things happen without us even noticing. I mean, you probably wouldn't even feel one until it gets higher up in intensity, right? But before we go there, I'll share a video with you, okay? And I'll put it on full screen if I can. It has no audio, so I may talk over this a little bit. But what it is, it's a USGS video that shows you earthquakes around the world. And it's basically entitled Earthquakes of the 20th Century, Global Earthquake Animation, the 20th Century. Okay, actually NOAA made this. Okay, now if you watch, these dots are going to start popping up all over the map. Now there's not a lot of them at first because that's when they were installing all these devices to measure earthquakes. So if you look down in the bottom left, you see the year there, 1914, 1915, 1916. And as it moves forward, you are going to see how fast these things start hitting. And these are, every tick is a year. And you'll also begin to see the fault lines form or take shape. They've always been there, but the animation will show you where the fault lines are. You can already see around California. Now, there's a ton of little ones that you can't see on this map. This is the world, right? The big ones are going to show up as big pops. There was one in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Now you're going to look on the big ones are going to be, there's one in Russia. The big ones are going to be along the coast of South America, up near the Aleutian Islands, and then up near Russia. Also, almost down to, there's another big one. They also happen underwater. If you look, you see a whole bunch that are, where there's no land. So that would be your tsunamis, right? Underwater earthquakes. And now they're flashing by so fast, we're into the 70s now, 1980, that you can see how often these things happen. And look at my little area down there. I'm in the eastern United States. Look how many little tiny, tiny white dots are over there. That's nothing. We don't get hardly anything here. And I've experienced an earthquake in my lifetime. If you lived on one of these fault lines, you probably experienced them as a normal thing. There it is, 1901 to 2000, all of them. You can see the big, giant yellow ones. Those are the biggest earthquakes ever recorded. I think the very biggest one is South America, right down there at the very bottom of South America. But you can also see the fault lines there highlighted. That's because the Earth is there's earthquakes with magnitudes greater than 8. Those are the ones that kill a lot of people. A lot of people. And then there's the plate boundaries. The reason why the plate boundaries are there is because during Noah's flood, the great fountains of the deep broke open, the earth cracked like an egg, and all that water that was under there came shooting forth, and that is part of what flooded the earth during Noah's time. It was also the rain, but as we've covered in other lessons, the rain itself was not the only thing that flooded the earth. The earth cracked up and all that water came shooting to the surface. So, a lot to take in there. We're going to look at this very last slide here, and we're going to close. Talking about earthquakes still. Earthquakes are up 20% since the rebirth of Israel. That was May 14th, 1948. That's your super sign. Okay? I've said this before in other teachings. A lot of these end time prophecies could not happen unless there was a nation called Israel active on planet Earth. And there was not until 1948. That was right after the end of World War II. But earthquakes were up 20% since then. Okay? If you measure from 1900, which is when they started taking measurements. 1900 to 1948, there were 517 earthquakes of magnitude 7.0 and higher. And then from 1948 to 2000, there were 619, so an increase of 20%, earthquakes 7.0 and higher. The earth itself is having birth pains, as Jesus said. Not only earthquakes, but famines, wars, and people coming in his name claiming to be him. All right? These are the signposts that you need to look out for. They are all around us, all around us. I'm going to pull up a Bible verse here, Matthew 24:36. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, talking about the rapture here, okay? But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, there it is again, that reference to Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. So no one knows the day and the hour. That's been established. If the reason why I say that's referencing the rapture is because if you know when that peace treaty is signed by the Antichrist between Israel and the nations, if you know that the second coming is exactly 7 years away. So you can determine that day, but you cannot determine the day of the rapture. And that's what kickstarts this whole thing. Okay? But there's also a verse in Matthew 24:33. This is all up under the lesson of the fig tree. Okay? I'll go ahead and read that whole thing because it's super important. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. Okay? The fig tree is a symbol of Israel. Okay? As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, talking about all the signs we already studied, because this is just further down in the same chapter. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. So you may not know the day and the hour, but you know when he's close. You've seen that sign that says, "Welcome to Myrtle Beach." Okay? You haven't parked yet, but you know you're there. Okay? So you know that he is near at the very gates. And then he finishes it off. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So what he's saying is the generation that lives to see these things, that super sign of Israel being reborn and all of these birth pains increasing in intensity, the fig tree reblossoming, which is Israel coming back to life, you are part of that generation. And so you need to keep your eyes up and looking for the Savior. Amen. Please get in a church. Please get baptized the right way. And please seek the Holy Ghost. Okay? Look for a church that teaches the Bible and only the Bible. That's my disclaimer for the end of the videos.